During the summertime, you know, the sun is going out, up, and then flatten out, and then coming down. You will have a very long period where you can use the same curve.
You know when noon is, because you know that's when the sun's highest, and just swing this thing round until the shadow is on that line. And that will tell you where north is, because north is opposite where the shadow is smallest.
The great advantage is that you have no variation or deviation. This is a true compass.
And it's absolutely perfect. It's so simple. It's got to be right. Now, I've tried one. I tried it over about 55 miles. And at the end of that, which was about 12 hours, I was only half a mile out in my position.
In contrast to the imaginative techniques devised for navigation, the Vikings employed brutally simple tactics in battle. The absence of a cohesive political structure unifying Denmark, Sweden, and Norway caused considerable internal warfare. Since Scandinavia had very little flat land on which to fight, major battles between Viking powers almost always took place at sea. But ironically, naval actions usually resembled the simple tactics of land battles. Viking commanders arranged their fleets in lines or wedges, customarily roping them together with the larger ships side to side to allow mutual support between crews.
The ships were not used for ramming one another as in the Mediterranean. They were too lightly built for that, simply. So you would tie your ships together into a platform, and you would fight your enemy with stones, arrows, spears, and swords over the bows of the ships. Your best warriors would always be in the bow, which was laid against your enemy.
In addition to the floating platform that formed the center of a Viking battle at sea, there were usually a number of additional ships positioned on the flanks and in the rear. Their functions were to skirmish with the opposition, to attack the enemy platform, to put reinforcements aboard their own platform when necessary, and to pursue the enemy in flight. Masts were lowered in battle, and all movement was by oar, so the loss of a ship's oars in collision with another vessel effectively crippled it. The main naval tactic was simply to row close to an enemy ship or platform, use hooked grappling irons to snag it and pull close alongside, then prepare to charge on board. Boarding an enemy ship was usually preceded by a shower of arrows and, at closer range, javelins, iron-shod stakes, and even stones.
The favorite weapon, if you could afford it, was a sword. Many of them imported from Frankish smiths. Most people had a spear. Everybody had an axe. And it seems that a bow and 12 or 24 arrows would follow most people. You would have a wooden shield with iron protection in the middle for your hand. And those who could afford it would have iron helmets and chainmail, which is very, very rarely found and very often spoken about in the sagas.
After boarding, fierce hand-to-hand combat followed, and if a ship was taken, the men moved on to another vessel, sometimes cutting the cleared ship loose if it was on the edge of a platform. The most celebrated sea battle of the Viking era illustrates these tactics. It was fought by a combined Danish and Swedish fleet against a raiding Norwegian fleet under the command of their king, Olaf Tryggvason. Olaf had only 11 Norwegian ships when he was intercepted by the Danish-Swedish fleet, which was at least 70 vessels strong. Unable to escape because his ship, the giant Long Serpent, was heavier and slower than the enemy vessels, Olaf ordered his other ships to form a line on either side of the Long Serpent and lash themselves together into a floating fortress. The Danish and Swedish ships attacked the outermost Norwegian ships first, taking them ship by ship, until Olaf was left only with the Long Serpent and her two flankers. As the last attack overwhelmed the Long Serpent, Olaf escaped capture by leaping overboard to his death. In contrast to ship-to-ship combat, when raiding inland, the Vikings preferred to beach their ships on a small island or in the curve of a river, throwing up a rampart and stockade on any side which could be approached by land. This fortified encampment was usually left with a garrison, since the Viking ship was their only means of escape. These tactics and the ships they were based on allowed the Vikings to spread their culture to the distant corners of the earth. But as brilliant an achievement as the Viking ship was, it was not without its shortcomings. Shortcomings that sowed the seeds for the collapse of the Viking world. It was its lack of height above the water that led to the ultimate failure of the Viking ship as a fighting vessel. They had little success in the Mediterranean against galleys with their double or triple banks of oars. In northern waters, they began to lose their advantage in the 11th and 12th centuries, when larger and sturdier vessels called cogs and hulks were developed by European shipwrights. Even though they were slow and cumbersome, the high-sided medieval cogs were floating fortresses. In close combat, the rowed Viking ships were at an insurmountable disadvantage.
In Northern Europe, large heavy cogs with stones in the castles could smash the low, fast Viking ships, and there was no possibility of attacking the cog except by trying to climb up the ship's side, which was difficult with somebody waiting for you up there.
Though the Vikings added raised platforms to their ships, cog builders responded by building even higher castles fore and aft to themselves. Suddenly, the much-feared Viking ship was obsolete. In 1304, the whole Danish fleet, comprising almost 1,100 ships, was converted into cogs.
The last time the Norwegian fleet tried to do anything military is as late as 1400, when 7 cogs sailed through a fleet of about 100 smaller Norwegian ships unmolested and sacked Bergen.
As the once superior vessels of the Vikings were being eclipsed, so too were the Viking powers that built them. Sapped by internecine warfare, the Viking kingdoms of Denmark, Sweden, and Norway were, by the late 10th century, losing their military advantages over the developing kingdoms of Western Europe. With sparse economic resources and few broadly established religious and political institutions to build upon, the Vikings rapidly lost their ascendancy. Unmatched as freelance raiders and entrepreneurs, ultimately the Vikings were simply too individualistic to be organized into effective national powers.
And at the same time, the whole system of trade were changing in the early Middle Ages.
But sometime in the middle of the 11th century, the Scandinavian countries become part of Europe, more or less. We stop being Vikings. We are parts of Christian Europe. We go on fighting, but it's a state-to-state fight, no longer the thing of the Viking Age.
From the rocky shores of the North American continent to the forbidding islands of the North Sea, to the wide steppes of Russia, to the trading centers of Byzantium, the range of these extraordinary people extended further than any other ocean-going Europeans to that time. They left their mark on the better part of the Western world. And though Viking rule is now gone, their influence can be seen in all these places to this day.
For a very small population of people, this adventurous people who wanted to get up and go a Viking, we still feel their influence 1,000 years later. It's still there within us. The whole of Northern Europe has got a little bit of a Viking feel to it.
It was the Viking ships that spread their dominion to the far reaches of the medieval world.
I think for sheer quality of lines, you don't find anything more beautiful, more successful. The combination of beautiful ships and good ships is fairly rare in a degree as we have it here.
Their grace, seaworthiness, and brilliance of design served to fulfill the highest value of Viking civilization, the immortality of honor and reputation. As the Viking poem, The Speech of the High One, tells us, cattle die, kindred die. Every man is mortal, but the good name never dies of one who has done well.